The alien queen was thirsty. Then she drank from the human's canteen and froze. The air in the throne hall was thick enough to choke on, and I had been talking for 6 straight hours without a single break. My throat felt like sandpaper. My lips were cracked. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from pure exhaustion. 6 hours of careful words, 6 hours of watching every twitch of 13 glowing eyes that never once blinked. 6 hours of knowing that one wrong sentence could end my life and the lives of everyone waiting back on the ship in orbit. My name is Daniel Whitfield, and I was the only human allowed inside the Kalic throne world. Not a soldier, not a scientist, just a translator who got pulled into a war room because I happened to speak 3 dead languages and one very much alive alien tongue. Nobody expected me to end up sitting cross-legged on a cold stone floor in front of the most feared ruler in known space, holding a half-empty canteen like it was the only thing keeping me alive. Because it was. The Kalic queen sat above me on a black throne carved from something that looked like volcanic glass. Her name was Sosoriath, though nobody outside her closest guards was allowed to say it out loud. She was almost 3 meters tall when she rose to her full height, with a body covered in dark violet chitin that shimmered faintly under the hall's dim red light. Her mandibles moved slowly, clicking together when she spoke, and a small silver collar around her upper thorax translated her clicks into words I could understand. 13 eyes, arranged in a wide crescent across her skull, tracked every movement in the room at once. Nothing escaped her attention. Nothing ever had. Behind her stood 20 guards, each one armed with blades long enough to cut a man in half with a single strike. They had not moved in 6 hours. Neither had she, except to speak. We were negotiating a ceasefire, not a treaty, not friendship, just a pause in the killing that had been going on for almost a year between my species and hers, ever since first contact had gone wrong somewhere near the edge of the Ashvale Reach. Ships had burned. Colonies had gone dark, and now here I was, the last voice standing between 2 civilizations and total annihilation, and my mouth was so dry I could barely finish my sentences. I reached down to my belt without thinking and unscrewed the cap of my canteen. It was an old battered aluminum bottle, dented on one side from a fall I did not even remember, with a strap worn thin from years of use. I brought it to my lips and drank the last inch of water inside it, slow and careful, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. The room went silent. I looked up and found all 13 of the Queen's eyes fixed directly on me, not on the translator device on my collar, not on the folder of documents beside me, on the canteen in my hand. "You drink," she said, her voice coming through the collar in a flat, clicking tone. Again. "You have been drinking for hours." I froze mid-swallow, water still on my lips. "Yes, Your Radiance. We need a lot of it. Water, I mean. It is mostly what we are made of." Her head tilted, and the movement made every guard in the room shift their weight slightly, ready for something, though I could not tell what. "Explain." "Humans are almost 2/3 water," I said carefully, choosing each word the way I had been trained to. Slow and simple. Nothing that could be misunderstood by the translation caller. If we do not drink enough, our bodies stop working properly. We get tired. We get confused. Eventually we die, so we carry water with us. Always. Everywhere we go. "You carry it," she repeated, as if tasting the idea. "On your body. At all times." "Yes. And it does not run out." "It runs out eventually. This is the last of what I brought today." She rose from her throne. All 20 guards moved with her, blades lifting an inch, eyes narrowing, and my heart slammed so hard against my ribs that I was certain everyone in the hall could hear it. I did not move. I had been told before I ever set foot on this world that sudden movement in front of the Queen was the fastest way to die, faster than saying the wrong word, faster than insulting her ancestors, faster than almost anything else. So I stayed perfectly still, canteen in my hand, and watched her walk down the steps of her dais toward me. She stopped less than 2 meters away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off her body, close enough to see the fine hair-like structures along her forearms trembling slightly with each breath she took. Up close, she was even more massive than she looked from a distance, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I did not run. "Give it to me," she said. For a moment, I thought I had misheard the translation. I looked at the canteen in my hand, then back up at her 13 unblinking eyes. Your radiance? The water. Give it to me. Somewhere behind her, one of the guards made a sound, sharp and clicking, that even without translation, I understood as alarm. This was not normal. This was not part of any protocol I had been briefed on during the long shuttle ride down to the surface. Nobody touched the Queen's mouth. Nobody offered her food or drink that had not been tested a dozen times over by her own physicians. And yet here she stood, hand extended, waiting. I thought about refusing. I thought about all the training, all the warnings, all the careful rules laid out by our own command about not risking contamination, not risking poisoning an alien ruler by accident, not risking anything that could turn this fragile ceasefire into another war. But I also thought about what would happen if I refused a direct request from the most powerful being in this entire star system, in front of her own court, with her own guards watching to see how she would be treated. I held out the canteen. She took it in one enormous clawed hand, so gently that I barely felt the metal leave my fingers. She turned it over once, studying the dents, the scratched surface, the small drops of condensation still clinging to the outside from the cold storage unit back on our shuttle. Then, without any hesitation at all, she brought it to her mandibles and tipped it back. And she froze. Not paused, not slowed. Froze completely, every part of her body locking in place at once, legs rigid, mandibles stopped mid-motion, all 13 eyes wide open and unmoving. A thin line of water ran down from the corner of her mouth and dripped onto the stone floor, and for one horrifying second, I was certain I had killed her. I was certain that something in ordinary human water, something harmless to me, was lethal to her, and that I had just handed the ceasefire negotiator of an entire war a weapon disguised as a drink. The guards surged forward in the same instant, blades rising, and I threw my hands into the air and started talking faster than I had ever talked in my life. Wait, wait, it is just water. I swear it is just water. Nothing else. Please, wait. One of the guards grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise, and I braced myself for the end. Then the Queen exhaled. It was a long sound, deep and shuddering, moving through what I now understood must be 3 separate lungs, and it fogged faintly in the cool air of the hall. Her eyes blinked, one after another in a slow wave across her skull, and her legs unlocked, and she lowered the canteen from her mandibles with a hand that was, for the first time since I had met her, trembling. Cold, she said. The guard holding my arm let go, uncertain, looking between me and his queen. Your radiance? I managed, my own voice barely steady. It is cold, she said again, and this time there was something almost like wonder in the clicking translation of her voice. This water. It is cold. I blinked at her, my heart still hammering, trying to catch up with what was happening. Yes. It was in a cooling unit before I filled the canteen this morning. You do not have this, she said, though it was not clear if she was speaking to me or simply thinking out loud. You do not have preservation. You have this instead. Water that bites at the tongue on its own. Water with a temperature that argues with the body. She turned the canteen slowly in her claw, studying it the way a scholar might study an ancient relic pulled fresh from the ground. We have stasis fields on my world. We have chambers that hold a substance in perfect unchanging balance for 1,000 years if needed. But we do not have this. We do not have simple cold, carried on a hip, drunk without thought. I did not know what to say. 6 hours of careful diplomatic language, and none of it had prepared me for this moment. It is called ice water, your radiance. On my world, children ask for it at meals and complain if there is not enough ice inside it. Something shifted across her mandibles. A small twitching motion that I would later learn, after months of study, was the closest thing her species had to going pale with shock. You complain, she repeated slowly, when the cold water given to you for free is not cold enough. Yes, we do that. Often. She sat back onto the lowest step of her dais, still cradling the dented canteen against the front of her thorax, the way a child might hold a favorite toy, and looked out across her assembled court. Every guard, every advisor, every silent watcher standing along the walls of that vast hall turned their attention toward her, waiting to see what she would say next, waiting to understand what had just happened in front of them. I have tasted precious things, she said, her voice carrying now, meant for the whole room, and not just for me. I have tasted the last vintage of the sunken orchards before they were destroyed. I have tasted blood wine reserved only for coronations. I have tasted nothing in my 300 years of life that felt like this. I stayed silent, still kneeling on the stone floor, unsure whether I was supposed to speak or simply listen. This human, she continued, gesturing toward me with the canteen still in her hand, carries a miracle on his hip and calls it nothing, calls it ordinary, complains when it is not cold enough. She let out another one of those strange rolling laughs that the caller rendered as clicking static. What else does his world carry, without knowing what they carry? The chief advisor standing nearest to the throne, a tall, narrow figure with silver markings across his shoulders, stepped forward and bowed low. Your Radiance, we should proceed with caution. This creature's people are still, until this morning, our enemy. Were, the Queen said sharply, cutting him off. Were, our enemy. A being who offers a miracle without knowing its value is not a being who understands the weapon of war he holds. If humans had known what this was, they would have used it as leverage from the very first meeting. They did not. This tells me more about their nature than 6 hours of your careful words ever could, advisor. I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time since I had stepped off the shuttle that morning. It was not relief exactly. It was something closer to disbelief, the strange, dizzy feeling of watching a war shift direction because of a half-empty bottle of ordinary tap water. Your Radiance, I said carefully, finding my voice again. If it would help the negotiations, I could arrange for more. Cold water. As much as you would like. It is not rare on my world. It is not even considered valuable. We have oceans of it. Oceans, she repeated, and the word seemed to hang in the air of the hall like something too large to fully understand. You have oceans of this. Yes. And you drink from these oceans freely. We treat it first, to make it safe, but yes, freely. She stood again, and this time when she rose, the guards did not tense. They simply watched, waiting for her next words, the way soldiers watch a general who has just found the key to ending a long war. She looked down at me for a long moment, all 13 eyes steady and calm now, none of the earlier alarm remaining. Ambassador Whitfield, she said, and I startled slightly at the use of my actual name, my actual title, spoken for the first time in 6 hours of formal negotiation. I will sign your ceasefire. The room seemed to hold its breath. But I will add one condition of my own. I swallowed, throat still dry despite the water I had just given away. Name it, Your Radiance. I want a trade agreement, she said, separate from the ceasefire, separate from any treaty your government proposes. I want access to what you call ice water, and I want to understand everything else your world carries, without understanding its worth. Your people call these things ordinary. I suspect they are not ordinary at all. I almost laughed, right there in front of the most powerful ruler in the known galaxy, kneeling on a cold stone floor with an empty canteen no longer in my hands. 6 hours of careful, exhausting diplomacy, 6 hours of picking apart every possible outcome of this meeting, and none of the outcomes I had imagined looked anything like this. I believe that can be arranged, Your Radiance. She turned to her chief advisor, who was still standing frozen near the base of the throne, clearly struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Send word to the border fleet. Withdraw from the contested systems. We are no longer at war with these creatures. The advisor bowed low, though I could see the confusion still written across the markings on his shoulders, and hurried from the hall to carry out her command. The Queen looked back down at me, and for the first time since I had arrived that morning, something in her posture softened, just slightly, just enough to notice. You risked much. Giving your water to me without knowing what it would do, she said. Many advisors of my own court would not have taken such a risk for their own queen. Why did you take it for an enemy? I thought about the question for a moment before answering. Because you asked, Your Radiance, and because refusing you seemed more dangerous than trusting you. She made that rolling clicking sound again, softer this time, almost gentle. A wise answer, or a lucky one. Possibly both. Rise, Ambassador, she said, and I did. my legs stiff and aching after 6 hours on the cold stone floor. She handed the empty canteen back to me, careful again with her enormous claws, treating the battered old bottle like something worth protecting. Bring more of this cold water tomorrow. And bring your leaders. We have much to discuss that has nothing to do with war. I took the canteen back with both hands, feeling the last drops of condensation still clinging to its dented surface, and bowed as deeply as I could manage. It would be my honor, Your Radiance. As I turned to leave the throne hall, walking past rows of guards who no longer looked ready to strike me down, past advisors murmuring quietly to each other in rapid clicking tones I could only half translate, I heard the Queen's voice one final time behind me. "Sambassador." I stopped and turned back. "Tell your people," she said, "that the Kale no longer consider humans an enemy worth destroying. We consider them a mystery worth understanding." I nodded, unable to find any words worthy of that moment, and walked out of the hall into the cool evening air of an alien world, carrying an empty canteen that had somehow just ended a war. By the time I reached the shuttle waiting to take me back to orbit, my hands were still shaking, though not from fear anymore. I radioed ahead to command, relaying everything that had happened inside that throne hall, watching the confusion and disbelief spread across the faces of everyone listening on the other end of the connection. Nobody believed me at first. A war that had cost thousands of lives, ended not by military strength or clever diplomacy, but by a half-empty bottle of ordinary cold water and a queen's simple curiosity. But 3 days later, when the first official Kalic trade envoy arrived in orbit, requesting nothing but cases of bottled water and portable cooling units, everyone believed it. I still carry that same battered canteen today, dented side and all, though it has been refilled 1,000 times since that afternoon in the throne hall. Sometimes, when the diplomatic meetings run long and my throat grows dry, I think about that moment when a queen who had conquered entire star systems went completely still over a taste that my own people barely think twice about. It taught me something I have never forgotten. Sometimes the smallest, most ordinary things we carry without thinking are the very things that change everything. And somewhere out past the edge of known space, in a great dark hall carved from volcanic glass, a queen who once ruled through fear now keeps a small cooling unit beside her throne, filled with something her own people call, in careful borrowed standard, the miracle drink of the humans. It is, of course, just water. But then again, so is almost everything that matters.